Welcome to another episode of Nuggets with Sauce, the podcast dishing up bite-sized insights you can sink your teeth into, served with a saucy take on common leadership challenges by your host, Michelle Lawrence. Oh, I am so excited yet again. I'm always excited, but this time I'm extra special excited because my guest today on Nuggets with Sauce is none other than my good friend, Albert DuPont. Albert, we've known each other for at least a couple years now. I am so thrilled that you've joined me today because I know we're going to have an amazing conversation for our business leaders out there. But I want our audience to know a little bit about you. So, oh, and Jenny's making a guest. See, Jenny, my dog is so excited. She's making a guest appearance today too. Fantastic. Albert, I always love to ask my guests, can you please share with our audience, without using your job title, what is your kind of magic in this world? What's your passion and your purpose that you're doing to help others?
Michelle, thank you so much for spending time with me today. It's always great. And Jenny, of course, who's behind the scenes in her lovely Target kind of sweater over there in Chicagoland. So why do I do what I do? I remember that's such a great question. I remember as a kid, coming from authoritative parents that, children were meant to be seen and not heard. And that was so true in my family. And I think one of the things that really started to capture my attention, and I'm sure we'll go back into my background a little bit, but that we all have a voice that needs to be heard, and that not every voice can be heard because it's been squelched, right? It's been turned down. I grew up in a time where CB radios, right? So you would squelch the radio and kind of turn it down and things like that. But for me, it's really about making sure that everyone has a voice and that they can really fully actualize their fullest potential, so that regardless of who they are, who they want to be, what do they want to do, they have an opportunity to do that. And by using their voice, they're able to achieve whatever they want to achieve. And that's always been like my pivot point in terms of wanting to create a world where people actually could be their authentic selves, to be honest, to speak their truth, whatever that is, in a space that's safe, and that we could still debate, we could still disagree, but it doesn't mean that we have to be unsafe physically, emotionally, spiritually in those environments.
We are so going to talk about that. And, we're going to dip some of those nuggets in sauce today, I think, together, because I feel, and I'm sure you do too, there's a lot of people who, what's one of the key reasons for burnout in the workplace today? Our voices are being squelched. We are not feeling that we can be who we want to be. So before we dive down that road, I also always like to ask, do you have a recommended read, listen, or watch for us?
So one of the things I do is I work a lot with the LGBTQ plus community. And a couple of weeks ago, I hosted a what we call Rise and Grind Speaker Series. It's an opportunity where my company and I host these events monthly to ensure that small business owners, micro business owners have an opportunity to come learn from community members. And so my new book that I'm looking at right now is called Leverage: The People Who Love and Care About You Personally and Professionally, by Ron Rapatalo. I actually met Ron about 15 years ago when I was job hunting. He was a headhunter. And for some reason, I remember distinctly, I don't know if it was the location, the conversation, whatever, but I was walking along the Riverwalk in San Antonio, and for the first time, and Ron called me for this interview. So I'm with my sister, my brother-in-law, and I've got the phone in my ear. And for some reason, I remember Ron. And a few weeks ago, about 2 or 3 months ago, I actually came across Ron in a networking event. And lo and behold, he's now a best-selling author, right? So it's now been, and what it's about is building your circle of champions, which I've always said. I've never used that I've used some of that language, but really, the book's about who do you need in your life whenever you need them, and who are the trusted advisors you need in order to have in your life to be able to be successful. And I love that because for me, coming back to the previous question about voice, one way to really actualize your voice is through others and bringing people together in a way that they're able to support you, you're able to support them, and how do you build your circle of champions so that you have the support you need in order to be successful?
I love that. And I love that part of that, having been privileged enough to be a guest at that event and you know, have that author dig into that, is not only who do you need to serve those for you, how do you get to serve that role for somebody else too? So I love that recommendation. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you and I talk on a regular basis. You know, we're always in the realm of how do we help leaders be better, do all these things, what do they need to be thinking about? And I do want to circle back to what you were saying early on about the idea of, you know, do we feel heard? People want to be heard and understood. Do we get to have that voice in the spaces in which we operate, especially in the work world? And if we're not, what does that do to us as individuals? What does that do for us as leaders? And what does that do for the business as a whole? Let's unpack that a little bit, shall we?
Yeah, we shall. So let me distinguish a couple things whenever I say voice, right? I'm not talking about the voice of the person who's always complaining, right? Or the loudest voice in the room that always gets the attention, right? What I built my business on is ensuring that people can tell their stories. The voice of the storyteller, making sure that they're able to share in a safe environment. So I think one of the things that, you know, as we think about businesses and the work we do, and then, you know, mentoring, coaching that I tend to do, a lot of it's about being able to listen with a high level of accuracy. And so I tell people, and this may be a little nuggets with extra sauce on this one, there are 3 specific skill sets that you need to learn whenever you're actually listening. Most of the times, Michelle, they teach us how to listen as to paraphrase. And in my experience, that's not really a great way of listening. To really listen well, you've got to do 3 very distinct skill sets that have got to be developed. First is whenever someone's speaking, you don't want to paraphrase what they're saying. You want to actually repeat what they're saying, because it's their words, and your job is not to necessarily get what they're saying, but to reflect back to them what they've heard they're saying.
Right.
That's
And
how
just
you listen to someone's voice.
yeah, and as a quick qualifier, just to remind everybody, paraphrasing typically means I'm going to say back to you in my words what I think I just heard you say.
What I think you just said,
And
right?
what you're distinguishing here, Albert, which I love this is a great nugget, is don't do that. Instead, make sure that you say back what they said. This is not about you interpreting them. This is about you actually getting the original message.
That's correct. And so you did that beautifully, right? Like you just added to that tremendously, right? So you're getting the original message, right? And it's a mirroring effect, right? And it may sound a little weird, but it would sound like something. So Michelle, what I just heard you say was quote, dot, 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 dot. Whenever you actually can quote the exact terminology, people feel gotten, they feel heard, and their voice is heard, right? And so it's not your voice that you're interpreting on top of that through your glasses, through your lens, through your experience. It's really their voice that they're accentuating. So that's the first step. The second step in really deciding on a voice is to listen beyond the words. My experience, people don't say what they mean. They say what they think they should say. They say what you think somebody else wants to hear, or they say it in a place of frustration and aggravation and anger and whatever, right? But every single person, whenever they speak, has a commitment behind it. I call it listening behind the ears, or listening behind the words.
Love that.
So,
listen behind the words, that there's a deeper message or a motivation.
There's always a motivation.
Yeah, it's not just what they're saying, it's why they're saying. We always go back. I love my Simon Sinek. Always go back to the why. Why are you saying what you're saying? Why?
I'll give you an example. So for those of that audience that don't know me, I was actually a principal for years, an elementary school principal for years. And one of the privileges, and I'll say that with a smile on my face for those of you who listen to this, is that you sometimes have to deal with irate parents, right? They're angry for whatever reason. Whenever I can get the distinction that their words that are coming out may be very hurtful words, but then listen behind the language and say, you know what is this person really, what's the motivation? What's their purpose for this conversation? it's just a huge love and desire for their kids to be safe, right? Either emotionally, physically, or spiritually safe.
Mhm.
If you can listen from that lens, the words don't have that same level of sting.
Right.
Could they be inappropriate? Absolutely. I'm not condoning people's negative language, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you necessarily, as the listener, don't have to get triggered,
Right.
right? You don't have to be triggered in that experience, because what you're doing is that you're listening from their commitment, what they honor, what they value, what they believe. And again, I said the example of an angry parent, right? Beyond belief, they are more worried about their child than they are about me as the principal of the school, right? So,
Right? That's the
yeah,
important thing in any of these dynamics is what's the context, what's flavoring, where this person's coming from, all those kinds of things, that it's, words are actually the least of the things that we communicate truthfully. It's like what, less than 10% are the actual words. It's all the underpinnings of the other stuff, the tone, the body language, and all those fundamental emotional drivers that, to your point, I think are behind. I love that, listening behind the ears or behind the words. Love that.
and I have to have a core fundamental belief, right? One of the core fundamental beliefs I have is that everyone wakes up every morning wanting to do better than they did before. The most hateful, meanest criminal person in this world wakes up, I believe, the next day saying, I want to do today to be better than it was before.
To be a
And
better criminal.
it might last for 10 seconds or 5 seconds by the time they stand up and whatever life hits them, right? But in that moment, I think the moment that we wake up, there's a intrinsic human belief that we want to do better than we did the day before, no matter who you are.
I like that. I appreciate that. I often, in workshops that I do developing leaders, I often talk about, like, it's very, I'm not saying, to your point, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very rare, I think, that somebody gets out of bed and goes, how do I ruin everybody's life today?
That's my perfect example. I
Yeah.
don't wake up every morning and go, okay, I'm gonna make my list of everybody's life I'm gonna ruin today.
Yeah. And
That's not what they do.
I'm just going to get batshit crazy on everybody and just see how many fires I can light. I mean, there's that intent. There's that why. I love that. I love what you're saying there.
And by the time, if we think about the workplace, right? By the time they wake up to the time they go to work, 2 or 3 hours have passed, and life can happen in that short period of time.
Yeah.
And so whether it be family issues, kid issues, traffic issues, you name it, right? Unless you have a mindset where you practice gratitude and you practice meditation, things like that, and those things kind of start to slip away and you don't bother you, most people will have that daily grind that really starts to pile up on them, and some more than others.
Yeah.
Third thing. So the first one was just mirror back.
Yeah.
The second one is to listen beyond the words. The third one is practice extreme curiosity. Don't assume, just ask questions. And this is something I've had to learn how to do. And it took me a while. It took me 25 plus years of my career to really begin to master this. But how can I just be honestly kind of like a toddler who is playing with something for the first time, right? A new toy or something, that level of curiosity that a child brings. How can I really be curious as to why they're thinking that? So once I've actually listened to them, I understand their commitment, I reflected back what they said, I can then start to ask questions that allows me to understand what you said. So you said X. What I am hearing is that, am I accurate? Am I off? I wonder if you can expand on that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Just those kind of prompts around, can you tell me a little bit more? I don't think I quite understand it. Can you say that another way for me? Those kind of questioning techniques that allows them to talk even more, allows for that safe space to actually occur.
Yeah.
And so my entire career, especially during the last part of it, both in education as well as in business education now, it's really having people realize that we are all just trying to do our best.
Right.
These specific these kind of three sub skills that I've kind of mastered over time, and I teach people, it's really allows us to build a community, whether it be at home or whether it be at the workplace, where you can thrive and others can thrive, because it's free of judgment, it's free of concern, it's free of angst. And really that's to me why I do what I do. I mentioned the LGBTQ community that I'm a member of. And one of the things that is really important for me is that we create, and this, again, this is coming from years of being a gay man, right? Years of safe space and trying to create that safe space. So it's really important for me, just as a legacy and as a core value, that safe spaces have to be created everywhere. And I know, Michelle, you do a lot of work in building cultures, building teams.
Mhm.
And you and I both know that building teams a very difficult task, unless we can teach people how to communicate better, how to recognize people, how to make sure we look at strengths based rather than the negative base, right, of interactions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's very mutual, right? We all have to be engaged at that level to really make these things work. There's no point fixing, I'm using my air quotes over here. Let's fix so-and-so over here on the team, but not fix, not looking at everybody else in the mix, or one person, is rising to the occasion and really working at it, but nobody else is stepping into that space. There's a level, I think, of we need mutuality in some of this as well. You can work your ass off to get to a certain point, but if nobody's going to meet you part way, it's going to be really, really exhausting. And I think that's that space of, how do we create safe spaces and better communication and better understanding in the workplace? We all have a responsibility. We all should be held accountable, I think, in those spaces, to say, check yourself. Always check first, like, am I coming screaming through the door in a big snit because I got cut off in traffic, or, somebody took the last parking spot, or my dog threw up this morning. And
Yeah.
there's a million contextual reasons behind the scenes why somebody might come bursting in. And do we allow them the space to slow down, to be heard, to say something, to have a response that comes from a space of understanding and compassion?
Yeah,
Or
I
just sit down,
understand.
shut up, and get your job done, you little cog in the machine.
It reminds me, as a young leader in my 20s, I remember distinctly supervisors telling me things like, Albert, you need to listen better. It's like, what the hell what does that mean, to listen better, right? So I read the books and things like that, and paraphrase, all these listening skills, right? And yeah, there's a lot of research on that and a lot of great things. But what I began to realize, especially as a leader and working by others, is that I had to learn how to become a better leader. In order to do that, I had to be able to build relationships.
Mhm.
I am a high task person, not a high relationship person. And people today that talk to me and said, Albert, what do you mean you don't know how to build relationships? It was like, you don't understand the younger me. And the younger me wanted to kick ass, take names later kind of approach, right? Like cut people off the knees. I was not doing what I wanted to do in the world, which was build relationships. I like people. I love people. Yes, I'm an introvert. They exhaust me. That means I have to go home and recuperate after a nice evening of networking. But whenever I do that, I actually now have the skill sets and the very finite prescribed mechanism for developing those relationships.
Yeah.
And again, it unfortunately took me 30 years to learn how to do that, right? Like I wish somebody could have taught me in my young 20s exactly how to do it. And so, even today, I build my business to make sure that people have the information they need to make the best decisions.
Right.
We're talking about this right before the podcast recording, right? Like, are we doing the right things at the right time of our stage of business? Because I think there's a lot of noise out there.
There is. And, it's so funny and interesting, and funny in a great way, where you're saying, recognizing in yourself that you are more task-based than relationship-based. And of course, the second you said that, I'm like, well, of course. And I know that because I work with assessment tools, and I've shared my assessment tools with you, and that came out loud and clear. But the even getting the opportunity, and like you said, in your earlier years, and I will raise my hand and say the same thing. At what point did anybody ever give me the opportunity to even learn about myself, to know, because I'm actually the opposite from you, and that can be challenging in its own right. So I come from a space of being more relationship based, and where I will struggle as often as not, and you know this, I struggle more on the tasking side. So, and these are all things that whichever way you're slicing and dicing it, we have to have the opportunity to learn about ourselves. And you said earlier, let's look at it from a strengths-based approach. We're not saying we can't eliminate everything that drives us crazy or we're not good at, that's unrealistic. But the more we can dig in, particularly whether it's personal relationships or whether it's workplace relationships, the more we can give ourselves and others the opportunity to learn about ourselves and others and recognize, you're fundamentally coming from a different space. You're wired a little, I always talk about that head, heart, briefcase thing at work. Your head is naturally wired a little differently than mine.
Yep.
That's neither good nor bad. It's just who you are innately. Your ability to recognize that, and your ability to recognize where others are coming from a different angle. I mean, I see your strengths there as things that help me in areas that I'm not so strong. But I don't know how well I would recognize that or be able to have a good conversation with you and dig into it if I hadn't had the opportunity to dig a little deeper and find that out about you. And that goes back to, we have to have these conversations, we have to have these relationships, we have to be heard, we have to be understood, and that means we have to slow down and listen to each other. And how do we even learn if we don't have the advantages of using certain tools? How do we then make the spaces and learn? Like you said, people said, be a better listener. What does that mean?
What does that mean?
What does that look like, sound like, feel like, and how would I do that? And will I be given the opportunity to do so?
So let's talk about that, because, and I'll show you one example. So I was working with a local nonprofit here. So I live in Washington, D.C., right? So there was a local nonprofit in D.C. I was working with. And there was one particular board member, for some reason, just grated me. I don't know what it was, but I automatically wrote him off. Okay. Now, I had to really take an inside reflection on that one and go, okay, this guy's pretty popular. People talk to him. So how is it possible that I'm the only one in the world that doesn't like him? Well, the truth is, I never really got to know him. So how do we take responsibility for that? And I'll give you a few of these examples. What I did with this particular person is that knowing that I was prejudging him and knowing that there was a lot of people around him, and I knew some of the work he was doing, I didn't know quite the extent to was he doing. I invited him to coffee. I said, hey, can we just have coffee for 30 minutes? I can get to know you better. Well, that one coffee turned into a 4-hour conversation. Wow. Right now, we can call or text each other at any time, and we pick up the phone, right? So what was a prejudgment in which I did that for others, right? I did that to others. What I then began to see is that, you know what, I had to take a step back. I had to, reach across the aisle, if you will, and to hold the olive branch and say, hey, let's go get to know one another. Recently, I was mentoring a colleague of mine that is in his late 20s, and he was having trouble with the new promotion of a peer who got promoted, and he was like, I can't work with this person. So it took me a little while, but getting him to think, like, if this person was really that bad, then they would be that bad all over life. And no one's that bad all over life. There's somebody that loves somebody, right? So there's a reason or a beauty to each person. So in doing that and coaching him, what I was able to get him to take a look at is, hey, just literally start doing what you do for other people to build relationships. So do you bring coffee to your colleagues in the morning? Well, bring one to that person specifically, right? Do you go to coffee? Do you go to lunch at all? Do you guys ever take lunch? Yes, we do. Well, ask the person to go to lunch and just find their story, because it really comes back to, do we know people's stories? I was just at a a memorial service, Michelle, for a dear colleague of mine that I'd worked with for years, and I didn't realize, I was a young buck, late 20s, early 30s. I didn't realize she was about 30 years my senior at the time. So she just passed at 82 years old, and whenever the son and the family members started giving her eulogy, there was a whole level of complexity as person that she was, she had been through life's challenges,
Yeah.
and the things that she was able to see, like she was in an orphanage with her brother, right? The fact that she went to school, the fact that she worked at Disneyland in Anaheim, the fact that, she did so many amazing things. And what I walked away with was the fact that I never knew her story at that level, right? Like I never intentionally wanted to know that story. And now it's so funny. And that's been about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. I'm really making it a point to just asking people what's their story. Tell me something about you that I don't know. Even my best friends who I've had for years, I don't know all their stories.
No.
So it's
No.
like asking that question, like, so tell me more about what made you do what you did, right? Tell me more about why this now at this junction in your life. Tell me, how did you get here? And
Yeah.
know the stories allows you to connect with them on a much different level. Because I think it's you, Michelle, that often tells me is business problems are 100% people problems, right?
And
Yeah, and so if we can create relationships with people so they feel safe, so their voices are heard, so
Yeah.
they're able to be in an environment that not only works for them but works for everybody around them, the only thing we can do is get better.
Right.
Then what I can do as a business owner, and I did this just recently, Michelle. I was working with a client a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago now, and they wanted to fire, their entire staff. Like the entire staff is broken. I'm like, wait up a little bit. First of all,
Possibly back to your earlier point, you can't possibly say that every single
everything is broken, right?
By
Like,
the way, if that were true, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, like seriously, who's that on?
yeah.
Oh, okay. Anyway, proceed.
So I had them slow down. I was like, okay, first of all, you're not going to find a replacement right now easily because of the higher market and everything else. I'm like, just forget about that for right now. And then I started telling them and teaching them about, how leaders create environments that allow people to thrive.
Yes,
And
or
really,
not.
right. It was really incumbent upon them to create the environment which the people can thrive. So I was leading their retreats, because that's one of the things I do, business retreats, things like that. And I did an activity where the executive team had to sit out and the staff members had to do the work. And while the staff members are doing the work, I think we were doing core values, affinity diagram, something like that. They were up there moving things around, working together. They collaborated beautifully. They were asking great questions. They were very thoughtful. Everything that we would want from a team, they did.
Right.
And so I had to ask the C-suite team that was sitting at the table, because I was specifically didn't want them engaged so they can take ownership of it. And I said, what do you see? Right. And I had them reflect on what they saw. And they saw everything I did around the camaraderie, the thinking skills, everything we want people to just demonstrate. They
Yeah.
were demonstrating. And so then I turned to the C-suite team and I said, is it them or is it you?
Mhm.
Because the kind of coaching I do, Michelle, is very
Well,
much
they're doing over here when you step back. I mean,
exactly
that is
how did
so
that's not the team you told me about. That's
right.
not
We
who
need
I'm
to fire them all. Yeah, yeah. That is so very true. I think a couple of these nuggets that I'm loving that you're sharing here is, and I'll just loop back for a quick sec. Let's not lose sight of what you were just saying a moment ago too about we don't really know people's stories and how valuable it can be when we are open. And that might mean that we have to, suck up our ego a little bit and open that door, as you're saying, extend that olive branch, which is not the easiest thing in the world to do. But people want to work with people they know, like, and trust. And the only way we get to know, like, and trust each other is actually opening the door and making the time to do those kinds of activities and ask people for their stories and use that curiosity that childlike wonder and curiosity you're talking about. So that's a really key thing, because, chances are the people who were working at that table minus the C-suite probably had spent more time sharing each other's stories and making those connections. They were probably, as can often be the case, more maybe disconnected a little more, not as familiar or comfortable with the C-suite and vice versa. There's it can be rare air over there. And so all of a sudden, and then threading that through to your second point, what's the environment? And if leaders don't make for an environment, and I always say model the way by creating and acting in that environment that says, hi, I'm interested in you.
Yep.
What is your story? Like, I don't care what my title is. I'm going to talk to you like a human being. I'm not going to go put myself over in a special place where the doors are locked. I mean, you can make of it whatever you want as a leader in your organization, but I'm sure it was an absolute revelation to that both of those groups, probably more the C-suite, to sit back and go, wait a minute, yeah, interesting how different this group of people could operate, communicate, collaborate when the environment changed and the leadership team stepped away.
I love that. And I think there were 5 members of the team, and I had them rank order by productivity level, right? Who was the bottom tier, right? Like who was the upper tier? And so whenever I started working with the C-suite and started to put in some processes in place and some systems and some relationship building in place for these teams, those that and it got to the point to where it was being clearly communicated within the organization. What had happened was that those that were able to rose, and those that didn't went out.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was okay, because they just weren't saying all people bad, right? Like they created an environment that allowed the cream to rise, right?
Yeah.
The people who were able to succeed in that environment with the vision, mission, core values of that organization, and those that couldn't saw their way out, which is great. You want to be able to do this. Now, I will tell you another side story now. The person who they were going to fire right away, the bottom person is now one of their top people, right? I remember distinctly saying things like, I'm not in the black box anymore. I understand where you're going. I can now see where we're going and what I have to do to get better. And that has helped me, right? Because from his point of view, he was always, he couldn't see, he needed to know the why.
Yeah.
Why things were happening, but he was in a black box, as he calls it, right? So
yeah.
whenever the light shone in, whenever we were able to take those walls down and begin to communicate what are the expectations, what are the core values, what are the mission and vision of the organization, how do we be able to get from point A to point B? As long as he had that support to give him feedback, he started to rise to the occasion. And isn't that what you want for people, just to be able to rise to their fullest potential?
Right. Yeah. And again, I mean, this is not rocket science, what you and I do. And it's not rocket science or that difficult for leaders. It just takes that willingness to look at that and go, like, isn't it amazing what a totally different dynamic? The person that they thought that they wanted to fire becomes the person that, it makes a tremendous positive difference. And, it wasn't some magic bullet thing that had to take place there. It's just, again, that opening up, like, what's his story? What were his needs? Listening to what he needed. And yeah, some people are going to be out of alignment. Not everybody's going to make sense and add up. And by the way, and that's where, this will be a whole other conversation for another day. But on the front end, you've also got to make sure that you are listening to people and drawing out from them and being curious about, like, getting them to talk about things like, would they make the right fit in the first place before you even hire them, let alone once you've got them, opening up those opportunities to say, kind of what's working, where you stuck, what could we be doing differently? And because you don't want to lose great people. And to your point, you may have great people and you don't even know it because you just really haven't given them what they need to have that voice and get recognized for what they need to be able to thrive. And it's not a one size fits all kind of equation, right?
And let me add to that as well too. I'm sure if we have any HR consultants listening to this, they may go a little, their eyes might start twitching a little bit because of what I'm recommending. You know, in this day and age with the legal situation, people being litigious, things like that, you do have to be careful, right? And I'm not saying
course.
that. Do it in a professional manner, but it can be easy as doing it in a staff meeting
Yeah.
where you have people just do an icebreaker where they're talking about their story.
Yeah.
Or, you know, setting up one-on-ones with people, or doing it a C-suite team and somebody where you go have lunch together or something,
Yeah.
right? There are so many ways to do this in such a way that I think we've gotten I think we've kind of gotten away from building relationships out of fear of legal issues, right? Or, you know, and some of them definitely, some of the issues that are occurring definitely give it a bad name, because
Right.
there are some things that are definitely happening that are inappropriate. I would think for me, it's how do you develop that relationship and in a professional way, but allows people to be successful. And how do we, you know, we started this conversation with talking about voice and my commitment to making sure that every voice is heard. As you know as well, and I've said this already today, is as a member of the LGBT community, that is one community that really hasn't had a voice.
Mhm.
And I think about our BIPOC community, I think about many communities, the women in our community, they really haven't had a voice in leadership nor in business.
Yeah.
And they have so many great strengths to bring to the table. And it's incumbent upon us, and you have to believe, and this is a core value as well as I do. And I know you have this one: diversity of opinions, diversity of people, diversity just as a whole, diversity of thought, diversity of religion, diversity of
Yep.
language. They all add to the tapestry of success.
Yes.
And you've got to
Absolutely.
believe that everyone comes with something they can bring to the table. Now, as leaders, it's indicative upon us to find what that something is sometimes, because it's sometimes not obvious. Sometimes it
Right.
looks like they're just a pain in the ass. But in actuality, I'll give you one example. You know, strengths finders, right?
Yep.
I can never remember any of them to save my life. I love the work. I think it's brilliant work. I just can't remember them. That's why I don't use it as much. I think there's 25 or something of them. I don't know. There's so many of them.
Right.
But the one that I have that I've always had is restorative.
Mm.
And there are not that many restorative people, I don't think. And so what restorative is, and I had to really examine this because it was such an eye-opening moment for me. Restorative is your ability, and this is my language, and I'm sure Clifton and the Strengths Finder folks would say differently. But the way I get restorative is that I have the ability to see holes in a plan.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going from A to Z, I can tell you exactly where your holes, where your pitfalls are going to be, where your roadblocks are going to be, where your walls are going to be, where your speed bumps, and everything's going to be on your drive.
I would definitely say that's a strength that I see in you.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
and what I for almost 30 years I thought was negative, right? Because people don't like restorative people, and the reason why is because it seems like we're negative, we're always finding the flaws, things like that. The gift we bring is the gift of insight, the ability
Yes.
to see things before they happen, so
Yeah.
that you can prevent them from happening.
Yeah.
So my entire career, as a matter of fact, I even got workplace bullied for this, which is a whole nother conversation.
Mhm.
Was really getting to know that what I bring is a gift, and that we all bring gifts,
Yes.
all bring strengths, and how do we tap into the strengths? If I had somebody like myself now on my team, you know, we need to give space. So I tell business owners oftentimes, create an agenda that allows the entire team to flourish,
Yeah.
which means that for me would be an activity where, hey guys, what we're going to do is that we're just going to find all the pitfalls in this plan, right? That would be put in a sticky note, and we're gonna list every single pitfall, give a sticky note, throw it up on a wall, and categorize them and see what happens.
Yeah. And I think opening that space to say
Yep.
different, leveraging different things out of different people, and again, building your self-awareness and building the awareness of others, and then finding different ways to be diverse, mix it up, so that everybody has that opportunity to contribute and leverage their strengths that they bring. And, again, we know that that's going to bring a multitude of really positive spin around engagement, productivity, business outcomes, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely spot on. Listen, we can talk forever about this stuff, and we are definitely going to have you back and talk about this again. Albert, thank you so much for everything you shared today. This has been a lot of excellent food for thought. That I really think you have shared some fabulous ideas that I really do want our audience to take to heart and really think about, how can they do and bring to the table the kinds of things that you've shared with us today to really move that dial in the direction of, unleashing fuller potential in our workforces. So thanks so much. And thanks everybody for tuning in again on Nuggets with Sauce. We'll see you in another episode soon.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks for joining this episode of Nuggets with Sauce. I hope we fed your appetite for insights and information on how to improve your business. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never go hungry for more thought leadership.